Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Easter, happy Passover, happy spring, happy renewal. This morning we're going to tie together some things that we've been talking about for the last weeks or months, because they all come together so neatly, so perfectly at this time of the year when we celebrate the Easter holiday. Now, before I kind of jump in, I want to explain where I am coming from in this discussion. Right? So when we look at any endeavor, particularly in religion, but if we look at any endeavor that that human beings engage in, there's typically three levels. There's three levels that we can view things from, three world views perhaps. And the first and the most prevalent is the dogmatic way, or the orthodox way, or the literal way. So things are exactly what they say they are. They are nothing more. They are nothing less. Typically, when it comes to religious thought, you might see this more in dogmatic or fundamentalist teachings. The belief that my way is the right way and my way is the only right way, in some cases in extremes. And I don't mean to belittle any of that. I'm not trying to put anything down. I'm just trying to say that that's one way of looking at it. And we all of us typically start our lives to some degree in that worldview. Whatever family we were born into, we think that that's the way families are supposed to be. It's not until we get into our 40s and suddenly say, well, wait a second, there's another way of looking at things. And where I'm going with this is when we come around to looking at Easter and Passover and celebrations of renewal, there are these same ideas, right? So some of the ideas are, this is our way, this is our belief of what this all means, and that's good. That is the literal way, and that's fine. That's a place to start, and for some people, that's as far as it goes, and that's okay. That's okay. There's another and a deeper way of looking at things, which is, well, what is the generative theme here? What is the theme? We have Passover in the Jewish tradition. We have the resurrection in the Christian tradition. We have renewal in the pagan traditions. There seems to be some kind of a theme that is going on here. Some kind of a theme about an interaction between human beings and the divine. In other words, a theme that we are more than just human. We are spiritual beings. And this time of renewal, this time of spring, kind of reminds us of that. In sort of the dogmatic way of looking at spring, it's, well, life is coming back. The sun, scientists will tell you the sun is now shining for more hours a day than it was in the past. The ground is warming up. The trees are coming to bloom, and it is just simply a function of the fact that the Earth is leaning on its axis 23.5 degrees as it goes around the sun. We kind of get into the spiritual level when we say, but why is the Earth here? See, why are we here? What is this thing called life? Is life different in a tree or a bunny rabbit? Or is it the same life expressing itself in different ways? So we start to get into the deeper questioning. What is this theme? What are these ideas that are floating around through the consciousness of human beings, or the race consciousness, as Ernest Holmes might call it, or the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung might call it? What are these symbols? What are these generative themes that keep coming up? And that's largely where I'm going to be coming from today. And then the third level is one that we kind of alluded to with Wendy's reading this morning. And that is the personal level, or, well, what does it mean to me? But not what does that mean to me as an isolated, separated individual, but what does that mean to me because I am part of this life, you see? What does this mean to me in the oneness? This is the mystical experience. I am that. I am that. Okay. in Hindu teaching, we have the thou art that, thou art that thou art that. I can't remember the exact translation. Thou art that. As Dr. Holmes might tell us, he'd say, that which you are looking at, you are looking with. You are that. You are that. See, because you are part of everything. You are part of everyone. And you and I are part of everything and part of everyone. And we are, in some respects, we are part of the ancient people who celebrated renewal long before the birth of Christianity. We are one with the people who celebrated the Passover. We are one with the early Christians who celebrated the resurrection. All of these things mean something to us because they are in fact some way part of us. So what we want to do today is we want to kind of look at these themes, and I'm going to be speaking in very general terms. I'm not pretending to put forward a religious view that totally encompasses everything that one particular group might believe. I'm giving you my summation, okay? I'm giving you kind of the thumbnail version. And the reason for that is to get to the generative themes, So we want to look at these generative themes, but then where we want to end is, what does that mean to me? How do I incorporate that? How does that manifest itself in my life? So a very simple illustration of the three levels, for example. This comes from Emmett Fox's works on the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments we can take as literal truth. These are laws. These are things that cannot be violated. And one of them is, thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not steal. Now, Fox kind of interprets it a little bit. He goes right to the interpretation. He says, well, thou shalt not really means you cannot. You can't steal. You cannot steal. But nevertheless, it's good advice, right? For people who need to be told not to take each other's shoes, not to take each other's cattle, not to take each other's property. That's good advice. But that advice existed long before Moses went up the mountain and spoke to the bush that burned but was not consumed by the fire. Right? And remember, that was a symbol. I talked about that a few weeks ago. That is a symbol of a deep meditative experience. And the character Moses experienced the presence of God in a deep meditation as the fire that burns and does not consume, which is typical of the mystical experience, the experiencing of the light. Right? Jesus had the transfiguration. Remember, he went to the mount to pray, and he was so changed by the experience that his disciples thought he was glowing. Excuse me. Elijah was carried up to heavens in a chariot of fire. Again, a deep meditative experience. Right? So this advice or this commandment or this law, thou shalt not steal, it existed long before Moses. And Emmett Fox asks us to consider then, do you think, if you take everything in that story to be literally true, and if you don't take it to be literally true, then it's there symbolically for a reason, right? Why do we have all of this coming and going? Why do we have the smoke and the ground is shaking and all of these things going on? And then God says, tell him not to steal. Tell him not to steal. And he says, well, telling them not to steal is good. Maybe there's a deeper meaning here. Maybe what he's saying is you cannot steal. You cannot do that, And then this leads into a deeper understanding of the oneness, If you and I are one, how can I possibly steal? Why would I possibly steal? Anything that I do unto you, I do to myself, you see. It takes us into Christianity. That which you do for the least, you do unto me. See? We are one. I am one with everyone. But then there's an even deeper meaning. There's an even deeper meaning that he takes us to. Right? So we have this feeling of unity, this feeling of oneness. I wouldn't want to steal if I understood that you and I are one. As Holmes says, I'm not my brother's keeper, I am my brother. But the deeper meaning that Emmett Fox takes us to then is you can't steal means you cannot attain and retain that which you do not have by right of consciousness. You do not have the consciousness for it. We live in a spiritual world. It is done unto us according to our belief, our consciousness. And if we don't have the consciousness for something, we can't pretend. We can't pretend. And the example I use frequently is you read the stories of people who won the lottery and they got bazillions of dollars, and then a few years later they were broke again. See, they did not have the consciousness to go with managing that money. So we want to kind of look at these generative themes, and we want to say, oh, maybe there's a deeper meaning here. See, maybe there's a deeper meaning. Whether we believe that they are literally true or not is not as important as why do we have the same theme coming up in different cultures at different times, and what are they trying to tell us, and how does that relate to me? Excuse me. If you haven't read Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols, it's a good book to have on your reference shelf. You know. And pretty much what he was saying. Now, Jung was very, very heavily influenced by the Gnostic, Gnostic, the Gnostic teachers of the time. And he said the same symbols arise in different cultures around the world at different times and have similar meanings. That you and I, when we dream, we dream similar dreams, and the symbols in our dreams have similar meanings. And as Joseph Campbell, when I was talking about Campbell a couple weeks ago, he was looking at a German, I think it was a German psychologist, I'm not sure who he was quoting, but he was saying that these generative themes come up in different cultures, and it's as if there are fundamental primordial truths that are trying to bubble up through human consciousness. And they come up in different cultures at different times, and they are colored in the costume of that particular culture and the characters of that particular culture. So from that point of view, what is most interesting and perhaps most informative is why do we have the same sort of themes that arise in different cultures at different times, and in many cases requires a celebration in one way, shape, or form. So at the winter solstice, we talked about light. The light is coming back, If the sun kept going down, if the days kept getting shorter, life would come to an end. But as long as at the solstice, the next day was just a little bit longer, not a whole lot, but just a little bit longer than the previous one. Life was returning, life was continuing, right? We, the people who understand that, people of ancient times who understand that we are one, the people who understand that, to them there was such a greater significance. It wasn't that the day was a minute longer than the previous day. It's that the renewal of life was guaranteed. Because as certainly as the day grew longer, the spring would come and life would renew itself. So there's a deeper symbolism there, a deep meaning in different cultures at different times, and it doesn't matter whether they were in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. The idea takes place 6 months apart, but the celebration is much the same. The days are growing longer, life is coming back. So this time that we come to then, when we do come to spring, it is a time of renewal at the physical level. It is a time of renewal. We can see the leaves on the flowers that, the leaves on the trees are coming out. The bulbs are coming out of the ground. One thing I was reading this morning, the lily is a symbol of Easter. Of course, a beautiful flower blooms around this time. But it comes out of something, out of a bulb that looks dry and looks dead. And, if you go look at a bulb in a seed store and say, my God, this thing looks like it's rotten. But you put that in the ground, you see, and life knows what to do with it. Isn't that amazing? It knows the perfect time to come up. It knows exactly when the conditions are right. There's something within it that tells it to come forward. I remember when I was a kid, we had an experiment once. We didn't have a whole lot in the grammar school I went to, but we had a windowsill, and the nun had us take a piece of blotter from the desk. Remember, I don't know if you remember the desks. Did you have a big old ink blotter on your desk? We had the desk with the inkwells in it. But we would take a piece of that blotter and cut it up so it would fit inside of a jar, and then just put some water down in the bottom of the jar, and the blotter would wick it up. And then we would put a bean, just a regular bean, in there, and after a while that bean would sprout, and it would start to send a sprout up to the top of the jar, trying to reach for the sky. And we would take that bean, and after it started to sprout, we would turn it upside down. And after a few days, that sprout would make a U-turn, and it would start to go back. It didn't matter how many times we turned it over. There was something in that bean sprout that knew exactly what to do in order to live. In a similar fashion, if you've ever worked with grapevines, you go out and you tie all your grapevines up to your trellis, and in the process of doing that, you get some leaves turned right side up and some turned upside down. They're green on one side and kind of silver on the other. But if you look out there over the course of a couple of hours, all of the leaves that are upside down, somehow that plant has twisted itself. Mechanically, it has twisted itself around in order to receive the sunlight and to continue to grow. So there's this miracle then in nature itself that we can see, that life is renewing. Life is coming forth. The symbols that we have around Easter time in our tradition now go back before Christianity. Now, one thing probably ought to mention here is that as cultures collide, as cultures come together, and one culture tends to dominate the other culture, some of these beliefs, some of these symbols and these ideas that exist in the cultures are so strong that they can't be eradicated. They won't go away. Excuse me while I get a drink of water. So what has to happen is the new culture has to somehow assimilate the old ideas, the old gods and goddesses, the old saints and sages. Somehow it has to assimilate them into their teachings. And then the people who adhere to the old ways, you see, they can come right in and say, oh, okay, I recognize that, see. So if we look at, as Christianity kind of went around different parts of the world, some of the characters who were predominant in the previous religions, they became saints in the new religion. I think St. Bridget in Ireland, before Christianity, there was another Bridget in the native religions of the time. You will also see that as one culture kind of dominates another, that they take over the sacred sites of the previous culture. And what had been a temple in one religion now becomes a church or a mosque or a synagogue in another, as one kind of supplants the other. So, excuse me. So what happens is these ideas and these symbols that were so powerful and won't go away, they somehow incorporate themselves into the new traditions, into the new ways. Remember we talked about why is Christmas celebrated at the winter solstice? First, nobody knows for sure when Jesus was born, but if you read the scriptures, it would certainly seem to be in the spring, not in the dead of winter, right? Because the lambs were out in the field and those kind of things that don't happen in the winter. But it was moved, the celebration of Christmas was moved to the solstice because people There was something innate, or something in the people, or something in that symbolism of the solstice. But then what happened is Christmas was put there. Right? And instead of the return of the sun, S-U-N, it was the birth of the Son, S-O-N. And Jesus, instead of the return of the light from the sun, S-U-N, it was Jesus is the light of the world. So you can see how the one culture overlaid itself upon the other. And this is what we see going on at this time of the year in Easter. So the very name Easter comes to us from ancient times, and it was pronounced and spelled different ways in different times. It might be Esther, or A-E-S-T-E-R, or O-E-S-T-E-R, or even 2,000 years before the birth of Jesus, Ishtar, I-S-H-T-A-R. And in the Sumerian culture, in the mythology around Ishtar, her husband dies and goes to the underworld, and she descends to the underworld to go and get him. Now, as he dies, the sun starts to fade. See? Life starts to fade. Days are growing shorter. Winter is coming. Excuse me. But she descends into the underworld to go get him, and she must pass through 7 gates. And as she's descending through these 7 gates, with each gate that she passes through, another layer of her clothing is removed. To me, this is the dance of the 7 veils, which Cecil B. DeMille made it into entirely something else in order to bring people in his movie theaters. But the physical is being stripped away until she gets to the underworld, and she is naked, and she is there attacked and killed and hung on a stake. Now, some of her friends go to the gods and they say, we have to go after our friend. We have to find out what happened to her. So the gods send 2 characters to bring water and plants, right? The renewal of life, down into the underworld. So Ishtar's gone 3 days, and these heavenly beings come and they sprinkle the water and the plants onto Ishtar and her husband. I think it was Tammuz. And then they start to come back up. They start to be resurrected. They start to come back up. And as they do, the daylight returns and the days go longer and life renews itself. Now, this is a theme. This is a theme that existed thousands of years before Christianity. But I think you can see the similarity. I think you can see in this theme that there's something much deeper. There's a much deeper meaning that is being conveyed, and it existed in human consciousness in different cultures at different times. And that's, Ishtar's not the only one. There are others. But my point is that there's this theme, and that Ishtar and Easter and Esther, and in other cultures it was Aphrodite, they all kind of represent the principle, the same principle of the renewal of life. Now, a little side bit that I read as I was preparing is that in the Holy Land, I guess I need to give you just a little bit of backup here. Around the year 500, the Emperor Constantine decided to make Catholicism the official religion of Rome. Now, why he did that, you can research that on your own, but he did. And his mother became Catholic. And his mother, the mother of the Emperor of Rome, wanted to go to the Holy Land and wanted to see all of these places mentioned in the Bible. So you can imagine what happened when the mother of the Emperor of Rome got there and said, well, can you show me the cave where Jesus was born? Can you show me the tomb where Jesus was buried. And there was a scramble. Nobody wanted to tell Constantine's mother, well, we don't really know. And of course they said, well, yeah, it's just down the road a little bit. So they had to scramble to find places. And one of the things that they did was they searched to try to find the location of the tomb, which I think now we would call the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And where that church was built, it was built over a temple to Aphrodite. So here was Aphrodite, who in the pagan religions represented renewal, and then Catholicism on top of that builds the church where Jesus lay in the tomb before the resurrection. So you can see the continuity of the themes. You can kind of step back and you can start to see the continuity of these themes. Now, I promised at the beginning, before we started, I promised to tell you where the Easter Bunny comes from, which now, of course, I read it on the internet, so it may not be true. But the idea in the German traditions, Easter, or Esther, was spelled O-E-S-T-E-R, was the goddess of fertility. See? And of course, rabbits are a symbol of fertility. They're born in the spring and they're born in big litters. And you see lots of little rabbits running around. So life is renewing itself. The next generation is coming along. The lambs are being born. The birds are nesting. All of these things. So the legend in Germany was that there was an injured bird, and the goddess Esther healed this injured bird by turning it into a hare. But it still laid eggs. It still laid eggs, you see. So the tradition then of the Easter hare, the Easter bunny, coming around and laying eggs got associated with springtime, with renewal, with Esther, with Easter. And in the 1750s or so, we had in the United States, well, it was before it was the United States, in the colonies, a large influx of German immigrants to Pennsylvania, and they brought this tradition with them. So the idea was, that the Easter Bunny is going to come and is going to make a nest full of colorful eggs. Life is renewing itself. So at the physical level, there is something within us that you cannot help but notice, that life is renewing itself. Where things appeared to be dead, they are now coming to life. Right? The dance of the seven veils that I alluded to, the descent of Ishtar into the underworld, the removal of the layers. When I hear that story, when I think of that, I can't help but think about sitting here. I'm in our sunroom in our home. We've got a beautiful big door looking out on a deck. And just beyond it, the beautiful trees. And now the leaves are coming back. But in a few months' time, slowly, the vegetation is going to fall away until all that is left is the naked wood of the tree. And to me, that's kind of the symbolism. That's what I get out of the story, is that slowly the physical kind of gives way and drops down to the bare essentials. And it appears to be dead. It appears that there's no life, but there is life there, because it is one with all life. It is connected to the life principle. I love something Joel Goldsmith says when he's talking about supply. He says, if you look at an orange tree in the wintertime and it's bare and it's been picked and there's no oranges on it, you might think that, it's of no use. But it's of great use because it is connected to the source, you see. And it's because it is connected to the source, because the principle of life is flowing through it. There'll be a new crop of oranges next year. This is the feeling of oneness. This is the feeling of connectedness at the physical level that we experience in springtime. The the colored eggs, decorated eggs, they were used in Egypt for thousands of years. Eggs also are a symbol of life, right? Of prosperity. But now we're going to move into the spiritual, because the egg also represents the tomb. And there is something within that chick that knows exactly the right time to punch its way out of that which is enclosing it and to begin a new life. Right? Up until that moment, the only thing the chick knew was inside that egg. Maybe it could see through the shell, maybe it could hear through the shell. But something within it tells it is time. It is time to punch that hole and break out of that tomb. So we go back quickly. We go back to Passover and the Israelites in the Hebrews in Egypt. And Egypt was a symbol for a land of confusion, a confused time. And remember, they got there because Joseph went there because there was a famine in his land. But Joseph was a spiritual man. Joseph interpreted dreams and visions. Right? This is very important because almost 50% of what we read in Scripture is relating to a dream or a vision or a metaphysical experience, a mystical experience. So you can't look at something like that and take it literally. But Joseph had the ability to interpret these things. So Joseph was a spiritual man. And he also had the wisdom of the divine flowing through him. And he advised the Pharaoh. And because he was able to do that, Joseph and his people rose to positions of prominence. But then a new Pharaoh came along and he was threatened by this, right? The ego, remember I said the ego is the number 2 obstacle for our growth? The ego gets threatened when something seems to surpass it. There's very similar symbolism in Herod in the New Testament. You know, Herod was afraid of the birth of the new king and ordered the infants to be killed. Now that didn't happen, right? That is a teaching story. But it's the same concept. The ego is threatened by the development of the spirit. And the Pharaoh wanted to enslave the Jewish people. And God wanted them to be free, right? And sent a series of plagues to the Egyptians. And the 10th one was that the firstborn of the Egyptians would be killed if they didn't let the Hebrews, the Israelites, go. Now, again, historically, physically, I mean, God isn't going to come and kill people. But the firstborn represents something that's most precious to you. You know, what is the last thing that you're willing to let go of? If God said, I want you to give, what is the one thing you don't want me to tell you have to let go of? That's your firstborn. Think of it that way. So, so the Hebrews painted the blood of the lamb over the lintel of the door, and the angel of death passed them by, and they were able to leave Egypt. And then they wandered in the desert for 40 years, right? They looked into the land of milk and honey, but they couldn't go because the spies that were sent in there said, look, the people there are mean, they're giants. And the people said, we can't go. And imagine this. God did all these things, all these miracles, fed them, gave them water, moved them through the Reed Sea without getting wet. And then they get to the land of milk and honey, and they say, well, we don't know if we should go in there. Those are our own doubts, okay? So they had to wander for 40 years until the old doubts went away, and then they could enter. But the theme of the story is that God is with us. You see, God is guiding us. We are more than just physical beings. There is the presence of the divine with us, but we have to accept it. And we at times accept it, and we at times push it away, and we at times accept it, we at times push it away. Then we come forward to Christianity. Right? And last Sunday was Palm Sunday. Last Sunday we talked about consistency. Because Palm Sunday is, to my way of thinking, Palm Sunday is very much about false starts. You know, if you read the scripture, Jesus enters Jerusalem for the Passover holiday and people are celebrating. But then within a few days they're calling for his head. You know, and it always made me wonder as a kid growing up, how can this be, on this day they're celebrating, on this day they're shouting, crucify him. Now again, this is, to me, this is a teaching story. There's a whole lot more going on than just that. But to me, what I took away from it that helps me to make sense of it is that we all kind of go through these periods where we say, yes, what I wish is to grow spiritually. I wish to experience the presence of God. And then we get distracted and we go on to other things. Or our ego gets involved as the Pharaoh or as Herod, and we become frightened and we try to kill off the spirit within us, right? We can't, though, right? As the poet said, it's the spark that can be desecrated but never destroyed. But then if we continue on into the story of Christianity, Jesus is killed. The physical is killed. But he says, don't worry about that. In 3 days I'll rise up this temple. And he's buried in the tomb. Very interesting. By the way, if you want to know a good read, from a Christian's perspective, a good read on the resurrection, I would recommend to you Thomas Sheehan, Sheehan, Thomas Sheehan's book called The First Coming. I think he's a Jesuit, and he does a very good job of looking at the scriptures and then taking us deeper and saying, but what does that mean? Now, one of the things you have to consider is, why is there a stone in front of this tomb? And why does the stone have to be rolled away? Now think about this. God has the power to take the dead and raise it back to life. And after Jesus is resurrected, he's able to pass through walls. Why does the stone have to be rolled away? Why does it have to be there? And you can see kind of an evolution in the scripture, the way the stories are told is, well, people would say that his followers came and stole his body. And they're going to steal his body and say he rose from the dead, and it's going to be a problem. So we're going to put a big stone there in order to keep that from happening. This is Jim's view of what we're reading. But to me, there's a deeper meaning. It goes back to what we were talking about last week. We're talking about consistency. And the weeks before when we were talking about obstacles. And the stone that keeps us, you and I, the stone that keeps us from fully leaving our belief that we are only human, right, and stepping into the fullness of our spiritual nature. This is being born again. This is the resurrection of spirit. The thing that keeps us from fully stepping into our spiritual nature are the obstacles we leave in the way, which is the stone that you and I must roll back. No one can do it for us. Excuse me. In the scriptures, the angels came and rolled a stone back, and angels are divine ideas, right? So you and I can have divine ideas that help us chip away at the obstacles and get rid of the things that we believe to be true that are not true. But this idea of death and resurrection and renewal, see, now we have moved from the literal to the generative theme. This idea of death and resurrection and renewal exists in many cultures. This idea that we are spiritual beings and that divine love is always with us, leading us and guiding us and guarding us, and capable of overcoming all obstacles, because we are not the sum total of our bodies, but we are spiritual beings. Those themes, those ideas have been with us for a long, long time. But it's not until we accept it and make it personal. Well, how does it relate to me? And I am one with that, you see. It's not until then that we start to get it. Not until then that we start to get it. Why is the earth suspended in space? Why is the sun where the sun is? Why is the galaxy as the galaxy is? Why did the singularity of the physicists, why did the nothing become something? One of the questions, if you read about physics, is why is there anything at all? Why is there something rather than nothing? Why? Why did that happen? And if we ponder these things long enough, if we ponder these things deeply enough, we come to this sense of spiritual cause. Spiritual cause. It is conveyed to us in terms of Genesis, where it says, in the beginning was the void and the chaos and the nothingness, and God spoke. God spoke its word. And then it was. And then it was. Spiritual cause, spiritual effect, and something acted upon that word and made it so. So as we start to allow ourselves, and I think this is most important, and this is why if we can, while we are going through these times of isolation, if there's some place where we can go and be safe, but to be out in nature and just participate in the renewal. I'm chuckling because one of my neighbors was out participating in renewal about 8 o'clock this morning with his lawnmower. Big rain is coming in later today, and I think he was trying to get rid of the grass before then. But I've got spots in my yard that I haven't gotten to yet, and they're really getting wild. Life is popping up everywhere. It is expressing itself everywhere. It is renewing itself in abundance everywhere. And that includes us. That includes us. And it includes us because we are part of it. We are part of the one life. We are part of spiritual cause. We are part of spiritual effect. We are part of that law that does unto us according to our belief. So as we come to sit in nature, as we come to realize through experience our oneness with all of life, our oneness with the people who lived 2,000 years before Christ, who celebrated their unity of all life, who understood that life is not just a physical thing, but life is a spiritual event that has a physical component. As we start to really get into that feeling, then we can recognize that in our times of trouble, if we turn to divine love for guidance, if we trust in the divine to lead us, we will find it. If we trust that we are spiritual beings and that the physical experience is a component of our physical nature, then perhaps we can find a desire to renew our commitment to living our spiritual life. Remove the obstacles by rolling away the stone. Get over false starts by being consistent in our practice, and be willing to come forward completely into the realization of our spiritual experience. See, all of these things are just symbols. All of these things are just symbols. We want to move past the symbols to the oneness with the principle that is there, to our unity with the principle that is there. as I mentioned within the last few weeks, we start out with this idea of separation. There is me and there is everyone and everything else. And we kind of view life that way. Then we kind of move into this realization that we are part of everything. Maybe not one with everything, but we are certainly part of everything. Then we hear a teaching, for example, we will hear the words of Jesus that say, you and I are one and I and the Father are one. And it sounds really good, you know. Oh, it's comforting. But at that point, it might just still be an idea, a concept. When we actually move into that experience of oneness, that we can say, oh, yes, we are one. And then we start to have it. And then what happens is whatever the physical is, we step out of that. We step out of our belief in the limitation of the physical, in the limitation of death, in the limitation of a stone that's in the way of that which can pass through walls. You see how there's a meaning there. There's an illustration there. So I invite you this year, as we go through this time of renewal together, you know, when you look at the Easter eggs, remember, they represent the abundance of life, but they also remind us that there's a time for each and every one of us to peck our way out of the tomb, out of the shell, which represents our old limited ideas, and we must step more fully into our spiritual existence. We must roll away the stone. We must be born again in spirit. We must let go of the old. You can't put new wine in old skins. Let's let the old skins go. Let's step forward into a new experience of the expression of this beautiful life. Happy Easter. Happy Passover. Happy renewal. Have a beautiful day. And so it is.